When you observe Manchester United from afar, does it look to you like the impossible job?
Well, I think it's. I don't think anything's impossible, but obviously jobs are difficult. That's just the reality of life in the Premier League. If you're a big club like Manchester United and you're not in the top six, then there's always going to become scrutiny. I think sometimes you have to look past the results and performances. They've missed a lot of chances. They haven't quite maybe got the points that they think they could have got. Sometimes teams go through that. You think you can perform your XG, but you don't. And then you get a bad day like they did yesterday, and all of a sudden the clouds can come over pretty quickly, and that's what they have to face.
Well, like you said, under siege, and it feels like with every Manchester United defeat, the manager becomes under more pressure, Graham. Give us an idea of what that's like. You've been there in your last outing at Chelsea in charge of a big club where every defeat is a crisis.
For sure, yeah. And I think the challenge is to try to have some perspective, to try to rationalise what's actually happened, to speak logically. After a game, everybody's emotional, of course, because football is about emotions, it's about feelings. Fans are hurting, they want to have answers, they want to blame somebody, and sometimes it is the manager, and sometimes, of course, we make mistakes and we're not perfect. But it's part of the job, it's part of what we sign up for. And I'm sure Erik would say the same. It's what he expects at Manchester United. If you don't win, or you don't play well, or you lose, then people are going to be critical. I think it was one of those games, whoever lost that game felt like they were going to be under pressure. It wasn't so long back that people were talking about Ange, about no tactics or no plan B, and all of a sudden he's won 4 in the trot, and now all of a sudden everything's great for him. It's flipped the other way. So you can't win unless you win. I think that's the thing. You need to try and get enough results to keep you guys at bay. And in the meantime, try to. I'm saying you guys, but you know what I mean. And then you've got to work with your players and stick to what you want to do, and take the club forward as best you can.
Another really tough week for them. They've got Porto, then they've got Aston Villa. Now, you've got someone in the camp in Dan Ashworth that you've worked with before. You know a lot about his processes. Would you be confident that he has the skills, the ability to help steer Manchester United out of these difficult waters, back to their former glories?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Dan's probably part of a team there as well. I think he'll want to support, he'll want to help. That's my experience with Dan. I don't know anything about the context of Manchester United, but I think my experience of Dan working with him in Brighton was he was very supportive. He would challenge at the right time, but want to help and be there for you. So I think football clubs, have to create conditions for coaches to be successful as well, and that's what he'll try to do as best as he can.
I hate to put you on the spot again, Graham, but it was much talked about this summer that Manchester United were having a lot of conversations with different coaches about replacing Erik Ten Hag. Were you among those that had a conversation with United?
I think what I've read so far in the media, a lot of it's untrue and false. I think I'm the only coach in world football that's been linked with Stoke City and Napoli in the same week. So I take what the media say as with a pinch of salt, and I think I've had lots of conversations with lots of people, and I think for the respect of everybody, it's best that I keep those private.
Kind of challenge you might welcome, though, or not?
No, I'm sitting here enjoying this challenge of answering your questions. That's where I'm at the moment.
The good news is there's a commercial break on the way.
Fantastic.
It's time for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you your first look at the sports stories in the morning newspapers. And we're doing that tonight in the company of Miguel Delaney, chief football writer at The Independent, and Sam Dean, football reporter for The Telegraph. Welcome to you both. Quickly run through some of the back page headlines. Erik Ten Hag's future, the talk of football once again. The Telegraph reporting what we've been telling you today on Sky Sports News. The Dutchman is safe for now. The Sun calls these tense times at Old Trafford, and there's a story top right about the footballers' workload debate. Andy Robertson calling for a task force to help deal with the calendar overload. They also carry John Stones on stepping into the midfield gap left by Rodri's injury at Manchester City. The Daily Mail's digital platforms pictured Graham Potter in the Monday Night Football studios as part of the Sky Sports team and ask if this could be his rehearsal if the United job were to become available. And looking at the Guardian as well, Ten Hag's big week is the headline for them. So let's talk to our two guests. Gentlemen, good to have you with us. Let's start with you, Sam Dean, because we're going to start with the Telegraph version of the Erik Ten Hag story, which dominates most of the back pages. Ten Hag, safe for now is the line.
Yeah, and I think for now is the key word. So the news we're reporting tonight, and James Ducker, my colleague, has been all over this all week and all day, is that Ten Hag is being backed for the next two games at least against Porto and Aston Villa, which would take Man United into the international break, which, as we all know, can be a dangerous time for any manager. But as it stands, the support is still there for Ten Hag, and we know that Man United and Ineos, since they came in and took over, they've been standing by Ten Hag and backing him, and they certainly have done so in the transfer market and given him what he needs in terms of the players and indeed to a large extent the structure behind him too. So certainly pressure mounting, but I think many people might have watched that defeat to Tottenham on Sunday and thought that could be the end, but we're reporting tonight, and I think across the papers, and as you say on Sky as well, it's not the end for Ten Hag. He still has time to turn this around, but it is very, very clear, and I think increasingly obvious, that the pressure on him really is starting to mount now.
And the briefings that have been given from United have led to headlines that can be written saying, they haven't been particularly, but they could be, 2 games to save his job. It's been made pretty clear that the focus is on the games away at Porto and Aston Villa. Does that feel quite unusual for a club of United's size and stature to allow that sort of conjecture?
Well, I suppose it's a fair reflection of the situation. Just as Sam was talking there, I was thinking 2 games actually, it's a little bit like the old-fashioned vote of confidence, words you don't really hear in football anymore. But that's sort of what this amounts to. Okay, we believe in enough for these 2 games, but something big has to happen. And that's where I suppose the situation gets, I think, even more questionable, because what do they expect to see in these 2 games that they haven't really seen over the start of the season, over the past few months, over last season? And it does feel as if it's almost one of these situations where United are banking on the positive momentum that comes from potentially good result or responsive performance. But we saw that in May with that crunch game that pretty much saved Ten Hag's job the last time, the FA Cup final. And it just led to this. And this now, where injuries aren't really an excuse anymore. He's brought in signings. Other managers who've been actually in jobs less and have also had to adapt signings, have had a bigger impact. So, I mean, what do United expect to see? I know it sounds a lot there like I think Ten Hag should go. But it does look, we're at a point now where it's essentially very hard to justify him staying in the job. I think one actually the biggest issues is United's big decision in the summer, which is the first decision of this Ineos leadership, where, I mean, I can't really think of situations where a manager has essentially been interviewed for his own job, as they've spoken to other candidates, and they've just persisted with him. That immediately creates an issue. It creates a potential problem for his authority, which we may have seen this season. And really, any manager in that situation has to have a really convincing run of wins to stave off talk about that. Otherwise, it becomes an issue. And again, here we are talking about it once more.
We saw The Sun briefly, which does mention a line that some of the squad are questioning whether Ten Hag is the man. And if we look at the back of the Mail, their back page splashed by Chris Wheeler and Sammy Mockbell going on that line. United stars expect Ten Hag to get sacked, Sam Dean.
Yeah, obviously it's quite an explosive line, and it really does give an indication of the situation at Man United right now. And just on Miguel's point, I totally agree. And I'm sure the players feel this too, that when a manager does cling on to his job in the way that Ten Hag did in the summer, and the fact that United quite openly were looking for other managers and looking at other candidates, when he clings onto his job by such a fine margin, the only thing he can do to sort of solidify his position is to start the season really well. Anything but that, and the pressure's going to come back straight away. There's so little goodwill in the bank, and there's so little credit there for Ten Hag to lean on, that a couple of bad results, and obviously a performance like Sunday, which was nothing short of disastrous, and suddenly all that pressure comes back, and all the conversation, all the discourse that was happening in April and May around that Crystal Palace defeat and leading into the FA Cup final, it all comes back so quickly. It's never gone deep below the surface. It's just there waiting to come out. And I'm sure in the dressing room too, they're aware of this, and they're conscious of it, and they're conscious of the fact that their manager was very nearly gone a few months ago. And you have to look at that through the context of their performances too. And you do have to wonder, and I'm sure, as we know, there were some pundits questioning this yesterday, but how much do the players really believe that Ten Hag is there for the long term? They know what the club were thinking in the summer, and yes, the club stayed with him, but it was hardly the greatest vote of confidence that they went around and spoke to numerous other candidates. So I'm not at all surprised by that report in the Daily Mail, and it certainly makes sense to me.
Yeah, I'll say that the Sun do carry that line as well. I'm just going to show the back of the Times just for a little bit of balance, and they are going harder on the line that he is safe for now, as the Telegraph was also saying United in no hurry to part with Ten Hag. That is the Times headline. But if you look at the back page of the Mirror, ends with a shout. Miguel, Simone Inzaghi of Inter Milan.
Yeah, who's obviously had a huge impact there, restoring the club to a Champions League final that they lost to Manchester City. Something, given the economy of football these days, is actually a hugely impressive achievement, even if the run there was maybe a little bit forgiving. But he's also made Inter the standout team, the dominant team in Serie A now with 2 titles. But I think this also feeds into one of the issues around Ten Hag as well. I mean, that Sam touched on there. That, I mean, really, the reason we're in this situation is because United couldn't find a suitable candidate that was readily available for the job on the terms at the time. Now, I do think actually 1 or 2 coaches in the summer they would have gone with had circumstances been slightly different, and some were interested. I think Tuchel is another, and who may come into headlines over the next few days, depending how things go. But that clearly hangs over all of this. But it does feel maybe the situation has shifted in the summer there, where some names that would have been considered at that point aren't going to be considered now. And certainly, Simone Inzaghi, especially given his performance at Manchester City last week, claiming that draw in the Champions League, he's someone obviously a lot of big clubs are going to be thinking about now because of the extent of his performance at Inter.
Well, here's another name who was with us, in fact, he's still in the building, still talking on another Sky channel right now. Graham Potter, who clearly is still available. The Mail online version mentioned his appearance. You could say that his interview here might have been an interview for a United job interview. In theory, Sam, would he be a good fit?
I think you can see the arguments in favour of Graham Potter, and it was interesting to watch him on Monday Night Football. Obviously, he's been out of the game for about 18 months or so since leaving Chelsea, but he's lost none of his ability to delicately sidestep around a question, which was quite enjoyable to watch as Nick Jones put him on the spot and on England and Man United. And he certainly didn't confirm nor deny any interest on his part in those jobs. But we know the relationship that Graham Potter's got with Dan Ashworth, and he spoke about that tonight. And that obviously makes him a potential candidate for Man United. And it also seems increasingly clear that Potter's ready to come back. The fact that he's on Monday Night Football tonight, for example, was an indication of that to some degree. And the other point I'd like to make on this, just quickly, is I think from the moment the Euros ended, there's been a sort of Gareth Southgate-shaped cloud over Manchester United, or certainly over Erik Ten Hag. And obviously, at the point of the FA Cup final and the point at which Man United were looking for potential candidates, Southgate was not an option. He was leading England into the Euros, and it wasn't clear at that point whether he'd be staying with England or not. Now, obviously, he increasingly does seem to be an option, and I do wonder how much that might loom in the way of Ten Hag in the coming days, or indeed how much we might see of that from the Manchester-based reporters over the next few weeks, because we know the relationship that Southgate has with Ineos, and we know they like him, and he is around, he is available. So let's see if that one becomes a talking point or not in the next few days.
I'm not sure what Gareth thinks about being associated with the cloud, Sam, but I know what you mean. Do you think that would work, Miguel? Would United fans fancy Southgate as their manager?
Just from speaking to United fans, from spotting some of the stuff on social media, it does feel there's a touch of resistance over it. Well, maybe a touch is actually quite diplomatically put. I think it's much more than that. There are questions over how fully he fits the club, maybe questions over how tactically he did with England. I think the greatest argument for Southgate actually is, well, there's 2 really. One is he's been successful in cultural change with England. And secondly, I suppose there's the connection as well, but also that it's not just about the culture with England, it's also about the pressure with England. I mean, this is one of the things I increasingly think with the United job now. Being an excellent head coach is the most important requirement, but it's actually only half the requirement, because a coach essentially has to have the personality or charisma to kind of withstand the immense scrutiny that comes with being United manager. This is an issue that it's almost kind of gone under the radar again, given it used to be talked about so much. But it's there, and any coach is going to feel it, especially after a bad run. You have to be really strong to withstand it. Southgate has experience from that with England. I suppose, I mean, the questions maybe about him tactically and the style of football, given he was sometimes criticised for conservatism and how much that fits with United, is obviously something that United fans would find resistance to. Maybe that comes down to how key your assistant is, or how advanced your assistant is. But yeah, as Sam said, it's one where I think you think momentum is going to grow. The only thing that I would say is that Southgate did maybe distance himself from jumping immediately back into football at a charity event recently, and even spoke about how his next job might be outside football, which you can imagine fitting as well. And perhaps maybe that may be why we're seeing more names come into contention for United.
OK, let's leave United for now. We're going to be talking about this for a few days, if not weeks, for sure. Let me just show you the back of the Guardian, because they've got a really good picture of Bournemouth celebrating one of their 3 goals, Sam Dean, with which they beat Southampton by 3-1, and deservedly so. Were Bournemouth in a false position up to now? Had some tough opening fixtures, hadn't scored many goals, but now suddenly, with Semenyo in your picture there and Evan Nilsson getting his first goal, they've got some proper striking power.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that first goal for Evan Nilsson might be quite a big one for Bournemouth, and certainly for him, because he's obviously had a few chances that he hadn't put away since his big money move to replace Dominic Solanke. So a big moment for him, and indeed another good win, a good win for Bournemouth, certainly. My main takeaway from that game, though, was Southampton. And you do have to worry, I think, to some degree. And we know how committed Ross Martin is to this style of play. And we know that he's going to be dogged by this question and this opinion throughout the season. He even said that at the playoff final. I remember being at Wembley when he said, I know I'm going to get criticised for playing out from the back next season, but it's what I'm going to do. And we have to admire that to a degree, but at the same time, after 6 games, the very basic question is, are they good enough at doing it? And right now, as it stands, they don't seem to be. And that is clearly a major issue for Southampton. And I don't get the impression that Ross Martin has any inclination towards changing or perhaps being a bit more flexible with his style. So either they improve quite quickly or they're going to have a very long and painful season.
Do you see a quick improvement, or do you see a painful season, Sam? Sorry, Miguel.
Yeah, you can already see the pattern. I mean, they've got this habit of basically being open and conceding almost 3 goals a game. That doesn't keep you in the Premier League along. I don't think it's actually such an issue if Southampton are in a situation now where maybe like Burnley, say, in 2015, if with a completely different style of football, they almost take this as one of these seasons where you get back into the Premier League, consolidate, go down and build a squad for the future again, and then maybe kind of raise the quality while playing the same tactics. That's where I think you can have more hope. But admittedly, that's a bleak outlook for this season because it does look like they're going straight back down, if maybe while being in some entertaining games.
You're watching Back Pages tonight. Welcome back to Miguel Delaney, Chief Football Writer at The Independent, and Sam Dean, Football Reporter for The Telegraph. Let's talk about John Stones, gentlemen. We've seen him do bits of midfield work. The Sun, one of the papers that focuses on the idea that he might do a lot of midfield work, and he's quite happy to do it with Rodri out for the season. Sam?
Yeah, this is Stones effectively saying he's ready and willing to play in that midfield role again, which obviously he did to such spectacular effect a couple of seasons ago and really made that position his own, kind of coming in from centre-back into midfield. And that was that season's big reinvention by Pep Guardiola. And it does seem that with each year, Guardiola has produced a new solution to a problem that none of us have even foreseen before. And it will be interesting this year to see what he can do in the absence of Rodri. I suspect that the John Stones option is a pretty straightforward one for Guardiola to implement, given that Stones has done that before and done it very well. But I am also curious to see whether Guardiola might think a little bit deeper and come up with something once again that's pretty much entirely new, or certainly new in the modern game and in the modern system. So it will be curious to see what he does and how long it takes for him to do that. But in the meantime, Stones does seem like a pretty reasonable option, and certainly a very experienced and skilled one to fill that Rodri void.
Sam,
the question is whether he can do so.
Sorry, you're kind of inviting us to second guess Pep Guardiola, which we all know is an impossible and very dangerous game. But Miguel, have a go. What solutions might Pep have up his sleeve?
I agree with Sam. I think it'll end up being. I mean, we are talking about the mind of a genius here, a football genius who can think and kind of conceive the way and none of us can. That's basically essentially how we managed to kind of turn the entire game in its head over the last 15 years. And even when Stones was used, the base midfield and that run to the Champions League final, well, that was Guardiola basically pulling something from his memory, which is his own position for Barcelona in 1992, this sort of kind of box shape around the defence, and kind of reinterpreting that for the modern game. And then just as quickly abandoning it for the next season. So I wouldn't be surprised if he comes up with something, as Sam says, that we haven't conceived of. But at least for the rest of us who kind of see the game in a more rudimentary way, John Stones, the defensive midfielder, does make sense, because in that kind of modern system, that Barcelona, Guardiola, Spanish possession pressing, centre halves and defensive midfield, actually there are a lot of overlap in terms of the abilities required. So it does make logical sense, even if Guardiola will have a logic of his own.
That might be quite interesting, Miguel, for Lee Carsley as well, mightn't it, if he does it for City and it comes off?
Oh, completely, especially given, I mean, Carsley is essentially of that Guardiola school. A lot of his thinking is based on the very idea, and Arteta is similar in this, of players who can play in multiple positions, so you can vary formations and roles. So, I mean, it could offer another solution for England as well, given that already Carsley's spoken about that he has to try and do some different things in midfield, given that has been a long-running issue for England.
It was Rodri who was among the first to raise the issue in the last few weeks of the problems of burnout, and talked about possible strike action. The Express on their back page at the top has the headline "Danger Signal," and Jurrien Timber, Sam, joining the warning about the dangers of burnout. Is this all going to burn out, if I can use that phrase, die away, or will something actually change?
Well, I think what was very interesting today about Jurrien Timber's press conference is that when this question came, and I suppose it was inevitable given the discussion over the past few weeks, one of the first things that Timber said was that it's a big talking point in the dressing room, not just at City and Liverpool, but also Arsenal and other clubs too. Like, this is what players are talking about. And I think it's only right that the media reflects that in our coverage, even if it's not the most perhaps sexy talking point for the rest of the world. But this is a big, major issue in football. And clearly it's one that's going to need addressing. Just on this issue, I do have a few sort of objections to some of the things that have been said. And I noticed last week Pep Guardiola saying that any sort of action or change needs to be led by the players. And I understand his point of view to a degree, but also I think managers have to take some responsibility here. They don't have to pick the same players for every game. Part of their role of managing is to rotate and to reduce the workload. And I'm not sure that all managers do that in the way that's with the best interest of their players' fitness. And the other thing is, as I'm sure has been discussed before, and I think I've mentioned it before on this show, but post-season tours, pre-season tours, these clubs are also not the ones necessarily taking the lead when it comes to this issue. And to say, it's up to the players to sort it out, I'm not sure that's quite right. I think the players need to do their own thing too, but also the clubs and the managers can certainly help the situation and perhaps stop making decisions for the good of the bank balance for the club and perhaps more for the welfare of their players.
And following on from that, Miguel, the Sun, top right of the Sun back page, stars want say on scheduled danger. Andy Robertson suggesting we need a task force.
I think Robertson's absolutely right. In fact, it's actually incredible that football has these conversations and there isn't proper input from among the main stakeholders, the players. And actually, this is one of the big complaints of the FIFA Club World Cup. I mean, it is interesting in terms of kind of the clubs are less critical of the new Champions League, which adds 4 games to the calendar and essentially eliminates that January break that they used to have while playing the European season right through the campaign, because they were consulted in it. The ECA, they were part of the negotiations. That's one of the reasons the Premier League have been so vocal about the Club World Cup, is because FIFA have acted unilaterally. That's the phrase that keeps being used. But that said, as Sam has touched on there, well, there's a responsibility even for those who are involved in negotiations for stuff like the expanded Champions League as well. Because the urge is always basically to just expand. That's the modern game, because expansion means more income, more revenue, and ironically enough, to feed this wage race. But yeah, certainly it's almost one of those where at this point football needs another international independent regulator for the calendar.
Run by whom?
Well, I suppose, this is it. that's where you get into a discussion where maybe it should be one formed by the various stakeholders in the game. Because, I mean, really, this is the amazing thing about it. FIFA and UEFA should actually be the sort of regulators that actually make decisions on that. But they're not, because they're not just regulators, they're competition organisers. They're part of this race. They want to increase these revenues themselves. And why, you'd wonder. I mean, part of it almost seems like an ego trip sometimes, because the two presidents, look how central they've been to some of the promo videos, say, for the new Champions League, or Infantino this weekend with the Club World Cup. They all kind of want their personal projects. They talk about the good of the game, but then they're criticised from all other quarters rightly for expanding it in a way that isn't necessarily for the benefit of the wider game. But yeah, FIFA and UEFA should be the regulators in this case, whereas instead it almost seems like we need an independent panel of all the various stakeholders to actually come to some sort of consensus on this.
Can't go on this, can it? It cannot go on.
It can go on. Erik ten Hag is the great survivor. He's been the United manager, I think, for 2 full seasons. I think he's lost something like 30, 34 games, and he's still got his job. I think the main reason he's got his job is because he won 2 trophies. They weren't the main trophies, the title or the European Cup, but he won the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup as well. I think that is the reason why he's still got a job. And he's survived some really shocking performances and results. The infamous losing 7-0 to Liverpool at Anfield. He survived that. Just 4 days later, they beat Real Betis 4-1. So I think in the short term, United are backing him. But if United keep playing the way they did against Spurs yesterday, because to my eyes, it didn't really look like, especially in the first half, that the players were playing for the manager. Unless he sorts that out, then he knows himself that he's under pressure and he's under serious pressure of losing his job, because performances like that are totally unacceptable.
Right. You just said to me he kept his job because he won the FA Cup final. He beat a Manchester City side. Do questions not need to be asked from the football hierarchy that they've kept him in a job, given how dreadful United were last season, on the basis of one game of football?
Well, I think what Ineos would say is that it wasn't on the basis of one game of football. They would say that, OK, it was a very disappointing season. We finished 8th, but we won the FA Cup. After the FA Cup, we carried out a review. And during that review, we decided that Erik ten Hag was the best man for the job and he was going to get a contract extension. Of course, depending on who you speak to, there's the other side to the story. And the other side to the story is that they went out and spoke to lots of different candidates. Everybody knows who they are. I don't need to go through all the names. And for whatever reason, they couldn't agree a deal with one of the other candidates. So they went back to Erik ten Hag. They went out, flew to Ibiza, interrupted his summer holiday, sat down, spoke with him and said, Erik, you know what, actually, you are the man. This is the plan for the future. We're going to make some changes. You're going to get some new assistant managers. We're going to give you more money to spend in the summer. There was going to be a reboot. Now, 7 games into the season, the reboot doesn't appear to be working. But to be fair to Ineos, I don't think they judged Erik ten Hag on just that FA Cup final win against City.
Right, but they did go and speak to a load of other managers, as you've just said. Does that mean they have actually missed out on some viable options?
Well, who are they speaking to in the summer? Who they're considering? OK, Thomas Tuchel is still available. Mauricio Pochettino has got a job now. Roberto De Zerbi has got a job now. Thomas Frank is still at Brentford. The one name they were linked with in the summer who's now available, who wasn't then, is Gareth Southgate. We know he's got close links with Dan Ashworth. He's got close links with Dave Brailsford as well. I think it would be a big story if he was ever to become the United manager. I'm not sure whether some United fans would accept him being their manager. It would be a difficult sell to them. But I just sense at the moment we're talking about Erik ten Hag's future when he's still got a job. Normally, we don't like talking about managers' future and speculating on whether they're going to keep their job or lose the job. But I think in this instance, it's a little bit different because Erik ten Hag himself, in the summer, he sat down with the Dutch broadcaster and said, I am well aware of the fact that United have been speaking to other managers. It's not the done thing in the Netherlands, but it appears to be in England. They've gone out and spoken to other coaches when they already have a coach. So we know that United were speaking to other potential replacements in the summer. And of course, if this run continues, like all big clubs, they have a succession plan in place. They will be prepared for the eventuality that Erik ten Hag could leave. But I just want to finish off by making the point. Erik ten Hag is the great survivor. We've been here with him before. He's been in the spotlight. Everyone's talking about his future. Everyone's saying it's unacceptable. This can't go on. But every time, somehow, he seems to get a few results or performances out of the players. And this saga continues.
It does indeed. Kaveh Solokol, our chief reporter, thank you.